All right. So are we back? I think we're back. Okay, rock and roll. So here we are. I think my camera's sagging a little bit, but whatever. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about the Greek classical era. Last time we talked about the Greek Dark Age and everything that happened with that. And this time we're going to be talking about the end of the Dark Age and the emergence into the classical era in Greece, specifically. Nowhere else. That's all. No. So, if you recall, the Greek Dark Age began with the Bronze Age collapse, the implosion of urban life in Mycenaean Greece, and the loss of literacy and the more sophisticated arts, like figurative art, sculpture, things like that. The Greek Dark Age lasts from about 1000 BCE, the end of the second millennium, to, 800, 700 something. It's not like big letters appeared in the sky except the Dark Age is over. People go, ooh, we can start writing again. It didn't, I don't know why they have that voice. All Greek people sound like that. No, I'm kidding. That's rude. It's rude to point it out. They do, but no. Sorry. You know that's not true, right? Okay. Just checking. Just checking. So, the Greek Dark Age ends sometime in the 8th century BCE, in the 700s BCE, but saying it ends is really just a matter of saying that urban life is recovering, which means that agriculture is recovering to the point where they can support a large urban population, which means that people have been able to exert control over the agricultural sector of society, to be able to get them to give up their surplus to support the urban population, either by coercion through some kind of kingship mechanism, as we saw in Mycenaean Greece, or through trade, what have you. Of course, if there's going to be trade that is of value to the agricultural sector, that means there have to be specialists who can produce stuff that non-specialist farmers can't. And in order for there to be specialists, there needs to be at least some agricultural surplus. So you can see that this is kind of a reciprocating cycle, right? The Dark Age doesn't end all at once, right? Farming, subsistence farming was clearly the rule through the Dark Age, probably due to a lot of death, a lot of chaos and warfare, as the food supplies ran out and people were fighting for what was left, as the social order was turned upside down. The world turned upside down. As the social order was turned upside down, there was all the chaos of the Dark Age. But at some point, enough of a surplus was produced to support at least small numbers of specialists who could then provide goods that the non-specialist sector, the agricultural sector, wanted. And this in turn helped to boost production. At least some of these goods probably did. And so on and so forth. You build up a sizable urban community again of non-farmers. And you get written records again. and you get highly technical, highly sophisticated specialist arts, figurative painting on pottery, once again, sculpture, metalworks of a kind that could not be produced by amateurs, so on and so forth. So the Dark Ages go in all at once in Greece. So when we say that they ended in the 8th century BCE, or sometimes when I give you a date like 800, I'm using a shorthand, right? I'm saying that by this time, we're pretty well out of the Dark Ages, right? It's pretty much a done deal. Okay. Now, one of the major markers used as a reference point for the end of the Dark Ages is the Iliad by Homer. And it's part of a larger cycle of poems that are set in the Mycenaean age and tell the story of a lot of big political events and a war with the city of Troy and so on and so forth that happened in the Mycenaean age. Now, linguists who are super smart people, I tried studying linguistics a little bit in undergrad. It is a very difficult field, especially computational linguistics. That shit is hard. The people who study that are friggin' wizards. I am in awe of them. It's way too hard for me. Linguists have determined, based on their analysis of the Iliad, that it was almost certainly originally an oral tradition, a poem that was spoken and memorized and passed along orally rather than written down, probably because the people who were passing it along couldn't write during the Dark Ages. Remember, loss of expertise, loss of literacy? Yeah. But they have these stories of what happened, like kind of right at the tail end of the Mycenaean age. And the Iliad is maybe the most famous of those stories. Now, obviously, because it involves the appearance of a lot of Greek gods and things like that, the Iliad is A, not entirely factual, and B, not entirely an accurate representation of how people thought in the Mycenaean era. Like, for instance, Zeus is kind of the king of the gods in the Iliad. He's sort of the most important figure. But in the actual Mycenaean era, Zeus, the sky god, was a relatively minor figure as far as we can tell. Because we can read what the Mycenaeans wrote. So as near as we can tell, Zeus was a marginal deity, and the most important god was Poseidon, the god of the sea. So what we have is, in the Iliad, a story that is set in the Mycenaean era and takes place, talks of things that happen towards the tail end, right near the Bronze Age collapse, and maybe contains elements of truth, right? It's easy to guess. I mean, there are some obvious guesses how it could have started, right? When we look at, it was an oral tradition passed down over 200 years to come out on the other side of the Dark Age in written form. Well, it probably started as stories, as poems told about the world that had just collapsed, right? Trying to preserve their knowledge of that world or their understanding of it. But a lot can change over 200 years, especially in an oral tradition. And especially as it gets written down, right? The people who write it down have their own sensibilities and ideas about how things work. And those ideas are not the same as they were 200 years ago. So the Iliad is this fascinating sort of bridge document that links together classical Greece of the post-Dark Age period and the pre-Dark Age ancient Greece, Mycenaean Greece. It sort of unites them in this weird kind of mush where some elements are clearly Mycenaean holdovers, some elements are clearly the product of the new classical era culture, and some elements it's hard to tell. But in any case, it tells a story, an epic story. And if you remember, an epic, larger than life characters doing larger than life things. That's an epic. It's an epic poem. It's huge. And it tells this story of the war of the whole Mycenaean world with the city of Troy over in what we now call Turkey, in the Anatolian Peninsula. So it is both a story of kind of like where did we come from, who were these people who lived here before us, and why did they go away? And it's also a story that reflects contemporary classical Greek values. Who are we? And what do we think is important? And aside from which, it's some pretty damn good writing, especially considering that, it's almost 3,000 years old, and, they didn't have a long tradition of other writers to learn from in the literary sense. So, okay. Now, usually in class, I say more about the Iliad, but what I'm going to do is refer you to a video. I'll put the link in the comments probably, or the description of this video when I post it. I'm going to refer you to a video by Red over at Overly Sarcastic Productions, where she does her recap and a little bit of analysis of the Iliad. I would like to tell you to read it, but it is enormous, and I'm not a monster, right? If you ever get the chance, please do. I think there's an excerpt from it in the chapters in the book, but that doesn't really give you the feel of it. Read the Iliad at some point in your life, if only because it is a crucial cultural touchstone for us. There are literary conventions established in the Iliad that we still follow today. Like, have you ever seen a television show or a movie that starts kind of in the middle of the action, stuff is already going on, and then it sort of backs up to tell you how we got there? But it doesn't start with the boring, slow part of how you get to the action. It starts with the action to kind of grab you, and then it backs up and fills in the details as it goes. That was started by the Iliad. The Romans called this technique, in Latin, they called it in medias res, in the middle of things, as a literary technique. You start in the middle of the story, you back up, you fill in the beginning of the story, and then you tell the rest of it, the end of the story. And it's a good literary technique. We still use it a lot today. That comes from the Iliad. Nobody had done that before. Literally the first time anyone had done it. The Iliad. So it was an important literary document. For a long time, it's crucial to remember that up until the early 20th century, probably, in European and Western culture generally, to be educated meant, in large part, among other things, but certainly this in large part, to be familiar with the classical Greek and Roman literature. Right? If you were an educated person, you would have definitely read the Iliad. And that means that all the educated people in Western history up until maybe just 100 years ago or so could make references to and employ stylistic devices from, and so on and so forth, the Iliad with full confidence that any other educated person would understand what they were talking about. This makes it a cultural touchstone. Cultural touchstone. One of the ways I like to give an analogy for what a cultural touchstone is to think of a movie that at your high school, basically everyone had seen, right? You could make a reference to it and everyone would know what you're talking about. Within that little microcosm of your high school society, that movie is a cultural touchstone. It's a common point of cultural reference for everybody in the conversation. In my day, it was definitely Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters was an enormous movie. It was hugely successful. Everyone had seen it. And it was very quotable. You could quote something from Ghostbusters and everybody would know what you were talking about, right? Some people have told me in other classes, for them it was movies like Anchorman or Talladega Nights or something like that. I don't know. Every year, new stuff happens. I get older. You guys are still the same age. I don't know what's happening anymore. I don't know what movies are cultural touchstones for you, but you do. And the Iliad was a cultural touchstone literally for thousands and thousands of years in Western society. So you can, its influence pervades our literary and fictional culture in a way that's impossible to really quantify. It's right there at the root of almost everything. So read it sometime. Familiarize yourself with it. Why not? What else are you going to do with your time, right? Binge watch another season of Friends? Get real. They're all trash. Yes, even your favorite one. Especially Ross. Ross is hot garbage. Anyway, maybe Phoebe's okay. I don't know. Anyway, but enough about Friends. A show I don't actually like. Don't like Seinfeld either. Doesn't work for me. Garbage people being garbage is not my favorite genre of TV. What can I say? Anyway, where was I? Right, the classical era. So, the classical era of Greece begins in the 8th century BCE with the recovery of sophisticated arts, literacy, and urban life. Growing out of this, although in the beginning the urban life resembled urban life in the Mycenaean era, very quickly a new pattern of urban life emerges in the classical era. First of all, the urban centers, the big ones especially, like Thebes and Sparta and Athens, they are much bigger and much more important than they were even in the Mycenaean era. So that's the first change. The second change is that some of these urban centers undergo a fundamental change in their system of social organization, their system of government. This is where we see the foundations of rule of law and democracy, which are two crucial ideas in world history. Now, let me expound a little bit on both of these, especially the rule of law, because your book has a few misleading statements regarding Sumerian culture, and Mesopotamian culture, and I want to clear those up. All right. So, what I mean by the rule of law is just the idea that in a society where this cultural idea is particularly valued and enshrined, there are laws that govern the conduct of every person in the society, including the rulers. That's why it's called rule of law and not rule of a person, right? The law is something that binds even the people in charge. There are limits on their power. There are things they can do and cannot do. There are things that they are required to do. And if they don't do them, they can be deposed, removed from their rule. Now, contrast this to Mesopotamian autocracy. Autocracy is a well-chosen term because while we usually translate it as rule by one, auto just means self, right? The autocrat is literally answerable to no one but himself. And it was pretty much always a him. Answerable to no one but himself. The book makes a big deal out of the Code of Hammurabi, a legal code that was promulgated in, I think, Babylonian times, and seems to set limits and laws over everyone, including the ruler. But first of all, we have no evidence that the Code of Hammurabi was ever actually enforced anywhere. And second, it certainly wasn't enforced after Hammurabi, who was a ruler, an autocrat. And if Hammurabi wanted to get rid of it, he could have. He could have just said, I know I wrote it, I don't care about it. Because that was the culture in those societies, in those Mesopotamian societies. The autocrat had absolute power. There was no external authority to which he had to answer. He could do anything he wanted. His will was law. Now, maybe that doesn't mean he was unjust, right, in the substantive sense, maybe in the procedural sense, but not in the substantive sense. Maybe, maybe he was a fair and decent guy, but it still stands that if he wasn't, there was no recourse, except maybe just murdering him. Okay, so what we see for the first time in the post-Dark Ages era, the classical era of Greece, is the rise of rule of law in certain Greek centers, like Sparta, which, although it had kings, two kings, it had a kind of constitution. So it was sort of a constitutional monarchy, or constitutional duarchy, I guess, more technically. It was kind of a constitutional rulership that these kings had. And there were things that they could do that would get them unkinged, if you will. And in Athens, what we get, although they had a king at first, Athens sets up a system of government based on the rule of law, wherein the citizens, who were white and male and landowners, I mean, it was a city of about 30,000, 40,000 people, and maybe a quarter of them were citizens, properly speaking. But still, that's progress. The citizens voted on the laws, and they helped run things. The committee of those who could vote, or the group of those who could vote, formed committees to take care of government projects, like, raising taxes to build a new waterfront area for commerce, or beautifying the city, or conducting the religious ceremonies that were necessary for the city. Things like that. This was called democracy. The rule by the crowd, demos, the crowd. Some people translate it as mob, but it did not have that kind of negative meaning in Greek. It just meant the mass of the people. But the real principle there was the rule of law, right? The people could amend the law, yes, but ultimately the people were bound by the law as well, as were the rulers that they elected to lead the city, as were the people on the committees who were charged with executing the government's authority. They were bound by the laws that bound everyone. So the rule of law. Now, how does Greece, this backwater of the ancient world, go through a complete collapse, which the other parts of the ancient world didn't necessarily go through? How does Greece go through this complete collapse and recover with what we consider to be a relatively advanced form of government? Well, there are theories, and no one is 100% sure, but one thing to reflect upon is the fact that while autocracy was working, more or less, for Egypt in the Nile Valley and the societies of the Fertile Crescent, autocracy was producing results. That is, it was generally able to ensure urban populations, the provision of goods, and so on and so forth. First of all, Greece did not have the agricultural surplus necessary to sustain a full-on autocracy. They did not have the wealth to sustain a full autocracy. And the second point is that Greece had a tradition of simple kingship. Now, I'm not going to reiterate the whole simple kingship model. That's from the last video, so please watch it. But the upshot here is that the Greek model of managing your society already depended upon negotiation and cooperation among ostensibly the people in charge, the people who are ostensibly in charge, and the immediate layer of prominent citizens below them, right? The king, in Mycenaean eras, the king did not have enough power invested in his own personage to force his will on everybody, and thus had to negotiate and cooperate with the prominent families to form a kind of government structure that could effectively promulgate and enforce policy. So, that means that as they come out of the Dark Age, there is a cultural precedent towards this idea of negotiated settlement of what we're going to do next. That the official policy of the government proceeds out of a balanced conversation where different voices are heard, compromises are made, and so on and so forth. Now, it's only a small leap from that to writing down agreements that have been made in the past and holding people to them. Like even the king, right? If the nobles are like, hey, you promised us this, and now you're going back on that, we're not going to support you anymore. And the king's like, oh shit, I need their support. I'm going to have to do that, right? So it's to the advantage of the larger group of people, the nobility, to write these things down and make sure that all parties involved are held to them. In a negotiated compromise, keeping track of what everyone is giving up, what everyone is promising, so on and so forth, is advantageous because you never know when you're going to be one of the parties who is getting the shaft and somebody else is trying to renege on their promise. So everybody is like, let's just write this down, right? Now again, we don't know for certain this is how it happened, but it's a fairly obvious evolutionary step towards the rule of law. And, the next step, of course, is holding a king to the promises of a prior king. To be like, look, I'd love to help you out here, but the king before you said this, and I like that. And so I'm not going to go along with you unless you honor that agreement. And he's like, all right, fine, because I need you. And then pretty soon, you've built your way up to these written documents that have a binding authority over all parties involved. And what do you know? That's basically just the rule of law right there. Pow, we've got it. Look at it. Rule of law. Boom. So, I guess it's not weird at all that Greece, of all places, would come up with this, because the material conditions in Greece laid the foundation for a different kind of social organization than they had in the Fertile Crescent and in the Nile Valley, where autocracy was feasible thanks to the large agricultural surpluses and the ease of access to neighboring regions for military conquest or exploitation. In Greece, Neither of those factors is present. We see simple kingship emerge as their model of social organization, and then after the Greek Dark Age, we see rule of law emerge. Okay, so democracy, yeah? Rock and roll. Maybe in the 7th century BCE, rule of law certainly takes shape fairly quickly after the Greek Dark Age. And we're off to the races. Greece is a different kind of place than the rest of the classical world at that point. All right, so what happens next? Well, Greece might have remained a relatively unimportant backwater. It was beginning to generate wealth through trade rather than solely through agriculture, which was also unusual, but easier to accomplish under rule of law than under autocracy. There's all kinds of complicated reasons for that. I'm not going to get into them here. You just have to take my word for it. So Greece was starting to generate a lot of wealth through trade. It had a literate urban culture, wherein each city sort of had its own government. It's called the polis system. I'll try to put that in the notes or the description, so you can, it may be in the book, the polis system. Polis, P-O-L-I-S, is Greek for city. The polis, P-O-L-E-I-S, refers to, there's an adjectival form of that, the polis system, the system of the polis. Polein, P-O-L-E-I-N, is the plural of polis. The polein followed the polis system. The polis system, wherein each city had its own government and was an independent political unit from the others. A lot of those cities began adopting some form of the rule of law, as Athens had, and as Sparta had in a very different form. Spartan rule of law was like a constitutional duarchy with like heavy fascist overtones. But anyway, democracy in Athens. So it might have remained a relative backwater, because compared to the rest of the world in that era, it was not particularly large or powerful. It certainly wasn't the center of cultural production. It was doing its own thing. It's kind of like Muskogee is, compared to Tulsa. I like to pick on Muskogee, just for the fun of it, basically. Anyway, it's kind of like Muskogee. It's kind of a backwater. But what happens is, way to the east, on the Persian plateau, in what would now be modern-day Iran, the Persians began building an empire, and it was an autocracy. Although, this is an important point, in Greece and in democratic Athens, you could own slaves, whereas under the Persian autocracy, they were much more equal. Like, women weren't citizens in Athens, but in Persia, they had many more rights. There was freedom of religion, so on and so forth. So it was an autocracy, but due to tradition, it was largely governed in a very fair way. That said, they did make war and bloodily wipe out any number of people as they expanded their empire. Funny enough, in the 6th century BCE, one of the groups that the Persians conquered was the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which is, say, another Sumerian or another Mesopotamian civilization centered around Babylon, which is very close to modern-day Baghdad, so in modern-day Iraq. Centered around Babylon in Mesopotamia, was attempting to build a conquest of the cities in that area. And the Babylonians had just recently conquered and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. They had burnt down the temple and they had led tens of thousands of Israelites off into slavery, which is to say they resettled them in Babylonian lands to work the land, to create that agricultural surplus that sustains the autocracy. So the Persian leader, who is known in the Jewish histories as Cyrus the Great, the Greeks called him Cyrus as well. Cyrus destroyed the Neo-Babylonians, and under his policy of freedom of religion, allowed the Israelites who were in captivity to return and practice their own religion. So this is a figure who is particularly honored in Jewish history. Anyway, the point is, the Persian Empire expands westward from the plateau where modern-day Iran is, the Persian Plateau. It expands westward from there, across the Fertile Crescent, into the southwestern parts of the Fertile Crescent in modern-day Syria, Israel, Palestine, places like that, and up into the Anatolian Peninsula, modern-day Turkey. Now there, it encounters some Athenian colonies that are on Anatolia rather than on mainland Greece, some Athenian colonies called the Ionian colonies. They refer to this area as Ionia. It encounters these places, and they say, congratulations, you are now ruled by the Persian Empire. And the Athenians say, no, we're not. We pick our own rulers. We have this thing called rule of law and democracy. We don't do that. Thanks for offering. We're good. And the Persian emperor is like, I don't understand any of the things that you're saying. Let me repeat. You are now ruled by the Persian Empire. Thank you very much. Well, the Ionians, the Athenian colonists, did not take well to this, and they fought back. And the Persian emperor was like, do you not know who I am? Like, I literally have the largest empire on earth right now. It's going to be one of the largest empires in history, still yet. Who the hell are you? You backwater hicks. This is like if the U.S. Army rolled in to, or well, let's say a huge foreign national army rolls in and is conquering everything, and it gets to Muskogee, and the Muskogee Sheriff's Department says, we'll fight back. What the poop, man? Are you kidding me? It's just bonkers. But they did. They wanted to fight back. And the Persians were completely gobsmacked that this backwater region was willing to fight back against it. But more than that, Athens, realizing that they were massively outgunned by the Persians, realized that the only way to fight the Persians effectively was to organize a resistance that was coordinated by all of the Greek world, by all of the different polein, the cities in Greece. Now, this is where we circle back to my bit at the beginning about the Iliad. How much they were influenced by the cultural tradition, the cultural touchstone of the Iliad, I don't know. But you have to guess it was at least a little bit. Because the Iliad is a story of all of the various kings of Greece, despite their differences and their petty squabbles, uniting to fight a foreign enemy in Anatolia, in the city of Troy. And they eventually win. They sack Troy and burn the topless towers of Ilion. Sorry, that's Marlowe, Faustus. Never mind. Anyway, that's Renaissance. Don't worry about it. They eventually win against this powerful foreign enemy. And Again, I don't know for sure, but I have to believe that that cultural touchstone of the Iliad and the story of the various kings of Greece uniting to fight a common foe had to have inspired the people when faced with Persian aggression. What they did was form something called the Delian League, Delian, Delian League, named for the Isle of Delos, Delos, named for the Isle of Delos, where the League had its headquarters. Meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice, meanwhile, at the Delian League, little Super Friends for you. The Delian League was meant to be an alliance of all Greeks. Now, how are they going to motivate? And the masterminds behind the Delian League were the Athenians. They were the political experts without peer in the classical world of Greece. And they masterminded this idea of a Delian League that would bring in all the Greek cities, and we would all fight the Persians together, rather than trying to make our own separate deals or fight separately, blah, blah, blah. We'll all put money into a common coffer. We'll pool our troops. We'll have a unified command structure. It'll be great. We'll have punch and pie. It'll be fabulous. Probably not punch and pie. But maybe. I don't know what the Delian League meetings were like. Maybe they were lit. I can't really say lit. 46. But I try it every now and then just to see if it sounds right. How did they motivate this? Well, they lean very heavily on an idea that we call Panhellenism. Now, to understand this, you need to understand a few things. Hellas, Hellas, Hellas was the Greek word for Greece, that is to say, where they lived. If you ask, where do you live? The Greeks wouldn't say Greece, they would say Hellas. Hellas, that was their homeland, Hellas. A person who lived in Hellas was not a Greek, he was a Hellene, Hellene, a Hellene. And for something to be Greek in an adjectival sense, like Greek food, Greek dress, Greek music, it was Hellenic, Hellenic. It was Hellenic. It was Greek in nature or origin. Okay. So, the Delian League was founded on the concept of Panhellenism. Pan, in Greek, just means all. And so what they were founded on was the idea of a unifying Greekness. That there is a core essential Greekness that unifies all of the disparate cities of Greece, of Hellas. All of these polein, though they may be distinct political entities, share a common culture. Now that in itself is not going to be enough to get them to fight. Because who's going to go to war and die for like feta cheese? Right? It can't just be about Greek food or Greek music. Have you heard bouzouki music? No. Although bouzouki might be Turkish. Anyway, the point being is, who cares? We don't want to die for that. No. The idea worth dying for, wait for it, I'm so good at this, rule of law! Teaching! Humanities! I am so good at this. The idea that animated the Panhellenic philosophy, the idea at the core of Panhellenism, was rule of law. They said, hey, look, we may be different. We may fight. We may call each other rude names. But we all believe in some form in the rule of law. And the Persians do not. They are ruled by an autocrat, an emperor, whose will is law. And someone says, yeah, but his will is religious equality and more rights for women. Like, shut up. Doesn't matter. Can't promise the next guy will be good like that. Maybe he'll be terrible. And he won't be able to do anything about it because autocracy, the word of the autocrat is law. Not answerable to anyone, period. The Greeks, on the other hand, believe in the rule of law. And this was their core motivation for resistance to the Persians, for fighting back. It was what animated the Panhellenic philosophy that the Delian League used to recruit and coordinate resistance. Now, unlike a lot of history classes, I'm not going to get real detailed on all the battles and shit like that. I don't care about that stuff. I mean, I care about it personally, but I don't think it lends anything to your understanding of what's going on. I'm not approaching history as a bunch of facts and names and dates. I'm approaching it as an understanding of the overall narrative that comes out of it, or a overall narrative anyway. The Greeks fight the Persian War for about 50 years, from about 500 BCE to about 450, roughly speaking, and they win. They conquer all the Persians. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. They don't have the manpower to do that. But they do get the Persians to go away and leave them alone. And that's amazing. Again, in our analogy, this is like this foreign army rolling up to Muskogee, and the Muskogee Sheriff's Department says, we're going to fight you. And they do. And they stop them from conquering Muskogee. Holy poop. Right? Now, I feel like part of it had to be the fact that, as far as Persia was concerned, there was nothing worth having in Greece anyway. It was a backwater. The only reason they were conquering it was that it was literally next on the list. And eventually it just got to be too much trouble, and they said screw it and went home. But the fact is, this tiny-ass little backwater area, Muskogee, I'm sorry, I just love picking on the people from Muskogee. It fills me with delight. This tiny-ass little backwater area managed to fend off the largest empire the world had ever seen at that point, still one of the largest empires ever in history to date, the First Persian Empire. It's pretty amazing, right? They kicked their butts thanks to the cooperation of the Panhellenic, of the League of Delos, the Delian League, that was driven by this philosophy that all Greeks have a common culture that is worth defending. That's the idea of Panhellenism. Panhellenism. All Greeks have a common culture that is worth defending. It's worth fighting for. Now, this is a radical idea in history. I told you that the Greeks came up with in medias res, starting in the middle of things, as far as literary style goes. Well, this Panhellenism thing was even bigger, because it is just a small step from Panhellenism to the idea of nationalism, to the idea of a national culture, that people, even under different political entities, have a common culture that is worth defending. You're going to see this idea reemerge during the 100 Years' War at the tail end of the Middle Ages, when the French and the English fight, and it stops being about disputes between individual French rulers and individual English rulers, and it starts being a clash of French people versus English people. So this idea of a common national character and culture lays the groundwork for a new way of a new method of social organization that we will see bear fruit in the post-medieval period. For now, it's not going to really have time to get traction, but the seeds have been planted. Anyway, the aftermath of the Persian War. Sparta took most of the punishment in the Persian War as far as troops went, because they had the most troops, and they were the best fighters, and so they took the brunt of the losses. Athens fought mostly on the sea, although they did fight some land battles. They fought mostly on the sea because they were excellent sailors and could build boats. Spartans were not. Let's just leave it at that. The Athenians were excellent sailors and could build boats well, and they fought the Persians on the sea. But they also handled the finances and the political organization of the Delian League. And so when the Greek world came out of this victorious, the Athenians naturally got the lion's share of the credit for the victory. And what happens then in the latter part of 5th century BCE, that is the late 400s, so from roughly 450 to 400 BCE, because we're counting down, remember. What happens there is we enter into what's called the Golden Age of Athens, a period of remarkable prosperity and prestige for Athens. If Muskogee had just fought off the largest army in the world, people would be interested in Muskogee. They'd want to go there. They'd want to know what these people know. They'd listen to these people. They would want to, cozy up to these people. And that's exactly what happened to Athens. The Greek world in general experienced a surge, a boost, but Athens in particular became a cultural, intellectual capital of the entire world at that time. It became one of the major centers, major urban centers. So, we're going to talk about, however, the golden age of Athens in the next video, primarily because I'm getting tired, and no other reason. Not that it's a good stopping point, just because I want to sit down. I'm kidding, of course. But seriously, golden age of Athens, next time. Hopefully this helped you understand Panhellenism, democracy, the rule of law. These are all tied together, obviously, and the general character of post-Dark Ages Greece. Okay, have a good day, and be well.